The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to this free webinar on leading with influence. And I also would like to wish you a happy new year to you and your family. And I hope all your dreams come true this year. So we've got 30 minutes together, and I'm going to just give you a quick overview of leading with influence and the model that comes from my book, The New Influencing Toolkit, which you can see on the page there on the right-hand side. If you wish to purchase a copy of the book, all you've got to do is send me an email and I can arrange that for you, which of course will give you about 65 different ways of influencing other people, which I think you'll find very effective. All right, so let's get underway. We've only got a short time together. There are three things ultimately that I want to cover in our session today. I want to talk about the concept of influence. What is it, or what isn't it? And what does it actually mean? I mean, the term influence can be used in a variety of different ways. I'm going to share with you then my influencing capabilities framework, which is unique and available in the book that I mentioned. And then I'm going to finish up very briefly with a couple of tools of influence. As I mentioned, there are about 65 different tools in the book, but I'm going to share with you a couple of those tools that I think are very, very effective. And then we're done in 30 minutes. All right, and at any stage, if you've got any questions or comments or observations, you can go to the question box. If you notice on the right-hand side, just click on the question box, open it up, type in your message or your question, and I'll receive it and respond to it immediately, because I won't be leaving time at the end for people to ask questions. I'd just like you to do that on the way through. Now, you can see on your screen now four famous people, and my question there to you is, what do these four leaders have in common? What they all have in common, of course, is one, they're all famous. I'm sure you could recognize most of them, if not all of them. And the second thing they've got in common is they've all been highly influential. So in their own field or sphere of activity, they've all had a huge impact in the world. I should also mention the other thing that they've all got in common is they're very controversial, in the sense that many people would that they have their detractors basically, and but nevertheless they've all been able to do something significant with their life in the world. So if you start at the top there, you've got former Vice President Al Gore of who was the former Vice President of the United States, who lost that very famous election to George W. Bush in 2000 from some of the irregularities in the voting system in the state of Florida. He then reinvented himself as a climate change activist at the end of that. We've got Margaret Thatcher, who was the first female Prime Minister, who served as Great Britain's Prime Minister for 11 years. And many people thought her as very controversial, but nevertheless she survived for 11 years in office. And then we've got Dr. Martin Luther King, who was a civil rights activist, who basically gave one of the greatest presentations of all time, which is I Have a Dream in 1965. And of course, he was tragically assassinated in 1968, along with Bobby Kennedy. And then the fourth person there is Mother Teresa, who was anointed a saint by the Roman Catholic Church a couple of years ago for the work that she did in the streets of Calcutta and other parts of the world, looking after the poverty-stricken. All of them had enormous influence, and of course one's still alive, and that's Al Gore. So I'm going to use them as exemplars all the way through so that you can kind of get a bit of a gauge as to what that influencing style is like. So let's move on. So what's my definition of influence? There's a lot of definitions of influence out there. My definition is simply this. Influence is the power to make other people agree with your opinion or get them to do what you want willingly and ethically. A couple of key points there. It's either about getting people to change their point of view or getting them to do something differently. And of course, doing it in a way that's doing it in a way that's transparent and ethical. In other words, people know that they're being influenced And so therefore they're quite willing to be influenced on the basis of that influence. Now, it's not about being cunning or underhanded or manipulative or anything like that. So that's essentially the definition. And in any influencing situation that we are in, there are basically three key characteristics that we need to keep in mind. I mean, the first one is, what is your preferred style and approach? All of us have a preferred style and approach to the way we like to influence other people. And interestingly enough, it's also the way we like to be influenced, as apart from how we will influence other people. But also, of course, the people that we're influencing also have a preferred approach and style as well. And when there's a mismatch between your approach and the other person's approach, it's likely that you're going to be less than effective in terms of influence. And then, of course, the third variable is the context, is the situation that you're in. And different situations require different forms of influence. So these things are very important, but we don't have time to sit there and think about those things. We just go ahead and react. But of course, my point here is that if plan A isn't working, then we move to plan B and not just keep banging on with plan A. So if you're a person who likes to influence people with facts, figures, and logic, and the other person has the glaze in their eyes when you're trying to influence them, then I'd suggest that the best thing you can do is to drop that approach and try another approach. Okay, moving right along, all of us, regardless of who we are in life, are in the business of influence. So all of us are actually what we might refer to as professional influencers. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because I think some people just don't see it that way. I mean, the reality is, if you're not being influenced, if you're not influencing other people, you're probably likely to be influenced by other people. So in other words, it's influences going on all around us. The question is, do you see yourself in that light as a professional influencer? Now, here's the influencing capabilities profile. It's up on your screen now, and you'll notice that there is a push and a pull style at the top, and over on the left-hand side, there is a logical and emotional approach. Let's actually have a look at these styles first. So, first of all, the push style is pretty much a style which is around, being very directive, proposing, giving information, shutting out alternative points of view. And then the pull style is a far more collaborative and conciliatory style of influence. And then over on the left-hand side, we've got logic and emotion. So people who obviously like to influence by logic will use facts, they'll use evidence, they'll use rationale, they'll usually be quite structured in their presentations, whereas people who use an emotional approach are likely to work on the basis of values and feelings and perceptions. So basically what that means is that we end up with four influencing styles or strategies. One is investigation, which is a push logical strategy. Another is motivation, which is a push emotional approach. Another is calculation, which is a logical approach and using a pull style. And then there's collaboration, which is an emotional approach using a pull style. So what I'm going to do is talk about these four in a little bit more detail, give you some ideas about it. And if you're interested in being able to assess yourself on this, I can explain how that's done a little later. So let's take a look, first of all, at the Inquisitive Investigator. So investigators have a tendency to marshal their facts and figures and assertively advance their case using a logical and persuasive approach. So they tend to be quite structured and methodical, and the person that comes to mind readily with this, of course, is Al Gore. And if you've ever seen his video clips on The Inconvenient Truth on YouTube, you'll notice that there's no shortage of facts, no shortage of figures, no shortage of charts, graphs, and statistics. So he very much did or does fit the mold of the investigator. So people in the workplace who are perhaps police or scientists and researchers their profession is very much to use the investigation approach. I mean, police officers marshal their resources, bring together a brief, put it before a court of law, and then people ultimately will make a judgment. A jury will often make a judgment about a person's guilt or innocence. And scientists and researchers are in the business of putting forward a hypothesis and then trying to demonstrate or prove or disprove that hypothesis using a rigorous investigative approach. And so they, of course, can be quite influential as well. So any workplace incident where you have, safety issues or harassment generally requires you to go and marshal your evidence and do some interviews and have some rigor around the approach you use to make some recommendations. Really would require you to use the investigation strategy. But with change initiatives, when you want people to be emotionally engaged, that is their hearts rather than their minds, is probably not likely to be useful in this case. So various situations require different approaches. Now the calculators like to promote the positives of a proposal and highlight the weaknesses of a current proposed position. So people generally know where they stand with the calculators because they're very clear about where the line in the sand is. Retailers are a good example of this. I remember walking past Harvey Norman several months ago, and there was a sign on the door that said 40% off all laptops. And I thought, that's interesting. I wasn't planning to go in and have a look, but I thought I'll go in and have a look anyway. And as soon as I got in the door, there was another sign that told me that I really had to purchase by the close of business today in order to reap my 40% discount. This is a classic calculation strategy. So here are the positives, the 40%, but here is the catch, if you like, which is, of course, purchasing today. And the person who I think fits the bill of those four people that I introduced you to earlier is Margaret Thatcher. When Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, it was very clear what she stood for. She was very clear about what she opposed, and people knew exactly where they stood with her, rightly or wrongly. And so as a result of that, she became hugely influential using calculation as her primary strategy of influence. Now, people who are in sales, as I mentioned, will use this approach. Financial advisors will often talk about the very best deal going. Animal trainers, say in a circus, you'll find that they use a whip in one hand and a box of treats in the other, and they use these interchangeably to get the animals to do their various tricks and so forth. Teachers, if you think about a teacher that you had at school that you really respected, I probably would imagine that they would be very clear about where where the line in the sand was, and you knew exactly where you stood. So this is very useful for any new change in the workplace that will directly affect employees and their working methods. So it'll require the leader to talk up the positives of the change, but also to talk about the negatives of not changing. In other words, if we were introducing a new software system, what are the positives of that? And if we didn't introduce it, what would be the negatives of continuing with the current system that we've got? Okay, so where it was not very useful or wouldn't be useful is in situations where working in teams is critically important. For example, we might have cooperation between two teams, and that requires a far more emotional approach than it would be a logical or calculation approach. So again, using the wrong strategy in the wrong way would not lead to influence. Now, what we're going to look at is the last two, but remember these two are the difference between these two and the two that I just went through is that these two are emotional approaches, which is quite different from the logical approach that I went through before. So motivators tend to use emotion to influence. They're usually big picture thinkers, often entrepreneurs that link a cause with a compelling vision of the future. So usually they often have a way with words, and they can define a very simple and compelling vision. And Martin Luther King was very much a mindful motivator. So if you look at his speech, in fact, on I Have a Dream, there are no facts in there at all. It's all beautiful rhetoric and phrasing and timing and all of those things that made that such a great speech. Entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, they have big picture ideas of the future. They surround themselves with people that will make that happen. Advertising executives have only got a short amount of time to spend with us, so they'll tug on the heartstrings and use emotion in order to sell their products or services. Public relations agents and artistic directors are very similar. So these professions will often depend very much on mindful motivation. So if you're trying to develop a sense of commitment, in other words, winning the hearts as well as the minds of people to a strategic direction, then the motivation strategy is the best way to go, because obviously you're trying to link people with a bigger picture, a bigger cause. Now, if people are unclear about the logic of a new initiative, so for example, if your organisation introduced unexpected cost cutting, then people will want to know, where are the costs cut? How deep are they? How will that impact on me? And what's the future? So people will want the facts. Excuse me, they'll want the facts before they'll start to want to talk about the logic of the approach. Let's talk about the final one, which is the collegial collaborator. Now, the collegial collaborator, also an emotional approach, they will tend to influence using emotion. The big difference with the collaborator is they will tend to create a bond between various team members, whereas the motivator will tend to link the person to the big picture. So they engage people at the emotional level. And Mother Teresa was a good example of that. She marshalled a lot of voluntary labour towards her causes, and many people joined her on the basis of that collaborative connection. So a couple of different professions or occupations, if you like, that very much deal in collaboration would be a conductor of an orchestra, whereas the conductor of an orchestra doesn't play a musical instrument, but they basically use their hands or a baton to basically bring various sections of an orchestra in and out of an ensemble and to create a beautiful sound. Funeral directors have to marshal a whole lot of support from a wide range of stakeholders to make the funeral a success. And of course, choreographers who are putting on a show do a similar thing. So in circumstances where there are diverse and strongly held opinions in a team, for example, you would probably want to air those views in a team meeting in a respectful way, of course. And what that does, of course, is it helps other people perhaps to empathise with another perspective that may not be their own. But if people need to know the logic and the rationale behind a decision, for example, introducing a new procedure pushed down from above, they want to know the reason and rationale for that before they will be willing to work together to make that work at the team level. So it would be wrong to get everyone together if they don't have enough information about the change and how it's impacting on their own workplace. All right, so there's the 4 styles of influence, and what I'm going to suggest to you, and you may like to go online and complete the self-assessment report. The self-assessment report will show you which of those 4 styles you are, but it'll do more than that. But that's one of the things it'll do. You get a 14-page printout that you can print out immediately from the report. What you can see on your screen now is the influencing capability framework I mentioned before, but you can see the numbers, the percentages that are in there. So not only do we look at the 4 influencing strategies, but there are 4 underpinning capabilities for each of those influencing strategies. So, for example, as you can see on your screen, there is gathering evidence, countering arguments, asserting ideas, and generating ideas are very much the competencies relating to investigation. And so you get a score for that as well. And what that does is give you very much a framework to develop yourself. And so what you should be doing is looking at your high scores, looking at your low scores, and working out how are you being too dependent on that high score. So for this person here, which incidentally, it's not my profile, but you can see this person's got 83% in listening actively. But on the other hand, they have we're looking at the relatively low scores here. They have offering concessions 53%. So if I was coaching this person, and I am actually, I would probably be recommending that they sharpen their concessional skills and perhaps not over rely on their active listening. And so it gives a more balanced approach to how people can improve their influencing capability as a leader. Now, the other thing that the profile does, and I'm just giving you a couple of tips on how this profile may benefit you, you get a rank order of the most to the least, the highest score to the least, the highest score. And so it gives you a bit of an idea or a pattern about what you like to do when you're influencing other people. There are charts and graphs and statistics. Numerous charts, graphs, and statistics will show you how all of these styles, approaches, and strategies compare with each other. I'm just whizzing through these at the moment because we don't have enough time to explain each individually, but when you get your report, you get all of these sorts of information as well. You'll see the little icons over here. When you click on the icon, you'll actually get a video clip of one of those 4 leaders, and you'll be able to watch them in action. So it'll give you a little bit of a sense of that style in action as such. So for $79, which is GST inclusive, you can complete one of those reports online. And if you're interested, all you need to do is go to this link up the top, click on the link. Now I'll be sending you a recording and the slides at the end of this presentation. You can go online and complete that survey and pay for it online as well. So that's something that you may find interesting. Now, what I do want to do at this stage is I just wanted to finish up. If there's any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to take them. I've been going at a rapid rate of knots to make sure we get everything in the time frame we've got. But if you've got any questions, any comments, any observations, go to the right-hand side in the question box and click on the box there and type in your question. I'm happy to answer that if you've got a question that you want to be answered. Now, one of the things I do want to promote, if I may, is that on the 24th of January, I have a Lunch and Learn series. Now, essentially, a Lunch and Learn series is an online learning program for leaders. So the good news is, because it's online, of course, we're not wasting time traveling or being accommodated or whatever. You can just tune into these webinars and complete them in your own time. So you can either do them live, or part of the deal with the Lunch and Learn series for $295 is that you will get the slides plus the recordings for every single presentation. Now, there are 6 in the series. So you can note on the left-hand side there, you've got 6 units in the Lunch and Learn program. These are the exact units that we'll be covering on the 24th of January, or at least the first one we'll be covering. And for $295, you can enroll in that, and it's a very easy process. I just send you out an email with all the registration details. And I know some of you in the presentation today have completed this, so you'd be aware of how it works. But because you have been willing to tune in today, I'm willing to offer you a 10% reduction in the $295. So if you contact me before the close of business today, which of course is Tuesday, if you do that, you send me an email, in other words, saying I'd like to register, then that would be great, and I'll make that happen for you. But the 10% only covers today. So you can see, of course, I'm using the calculation strategy to try to coerce you into registering. But it's a great series, and we've had some fantastic feedback from many people about the series. So by all means. Now, the other bonus about this is if you enroll in this, the good news for you is that part of the $295 is the opportunity to complete the influencing capabilities profile. So you'll note earlier there was $79 for the profile to do on its own. We throw that into, it is covered in the $295. And you'll notice in Unit 2, it talks about enhancing your personal influence. So during Unit 2, you'll be given a link and you can complete the profile and then come to the session and be debriefed on it. So you can save yourself a lot of money by just enrolling in the Lunch and Learn, and you get to complete the profile, plus you get a whole lot of other information that I think you'll find very useful. So I'd encourage you to do that. So folks, if there are no more questions, I think I'll finish there. I will say to you that this afternoon you'll receive a copy of the slides, you'll receive a copy of the recording, and so you'll get that information in your inbox sometime this afternoon. I think we've got one question here I'll just deal with before we wrap up. Here we go. I'll just get that up so I can see. Okay, how long's the series, please? David, this series goes for, there's six units. Each unit is an hour long. And so what happens is there's 2 weeks between each unit. So the idea is that Unit 1 will obviously occur on the 24th of January, and then 2 weeks later there'll be Unit 2, and then 2 weeks later Unit 3, and so on. So it takes a couple of months to get through the whole series, but we leave a couple of weeks between sessions because obviously we want you to apply what you've learned in between time in your own workplace. So David, I hope that's answered your question, and if you've got any other questions, I'm more than happy to respond to those as well. So that's it from me. So thanks, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I again wish you a great new year, and I hope the whole year is a great year for you, and you can achieve all your business goals. So I wish you all the very best, and I'll sign off here and look forward to receiving your questions and information regarding the Lunch and Learn series. So thank you, everybody, and all the very best. Thank you and goodbye.